Welcome everyone. This is Colleen McCarthy O'Toole from the Cure SMA Family Support Department. Thank you so much for joining us today. We would also like to thank our national presenting sponsors, Avexis, Biogen, Genentech, and Ionis, as well as our platinum sponsor, Scholar Rock, for their generous support of the Summit of Strength virtual webinar series. We appreciate all of the questions that we have received in advance of this webinar, and we'll try to answer many of these during today's presentation. You will also be able to submit questions through the webinar using the chat box, which you will find located in the GoToWebinar toolbox. Please note that all lines will remain muted during this webinar, other than for the speakers. If you have any additional questions after today's presentation, please contact the Family Support team at Cure SMA by emailing us at familysupport@curesma.org. We would like to point out one feature on today's webinar, as our presenter will be using a live webcam for part of his presentation. When his live webcam is shared, you will be able to use the arrows on your personal webinar screen to enlarge your video of his demonstrations. Now, we would like to welcome our speaker, Troy Baker, who will be presenting on ADAPT Functional Movement Center, Principles of Functional Movement and Rehabilitation. Troy?
All right, thank you so much for Colleen, and thank you to everyone at Cure SMA and for you guys for attending and letting us present today. Before I pass it over to Troy, my name is John Monteith. I'm one of the founders and the executive director over at ADAPT Functional Movement Center, and I figured I'd give you just a little bit of background on who we are and what we do before we dive into the topic of education today. So. ADAPT is an integrative recovery center based in Carlsbad, California, so in North County, San Diego. And all of our programs are focused around providing rehabilitative and wellness services for individuals impacted by chronic neurological conditions. And those could be on the diagnosis spectrum or on the injury spectrum. So we work a lot with ALS, MS, SMA, on the diagnostic side of things, as well as spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, and a whole host of other conditions that kind of fall into the neurological spectrum. We've been around since 2017, so just about 3 years, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So I would say that most, if not all, of our clients that come to ADAPT are on some form of scholarship program, from some minor financial aid through to a full ride. We're an integrative recovery center because we blend different modalities from 3 primary core pillars that we view critical to recovery. The first of those, and predominantly what we're going to be talking about today, is on the physical health and physical therapy side of things. The second of those is on the mental wellness and emotional wellness side of things. And then the third of those is on community development and building social networks between our clients and members, as well as with our staff. And we feel that if those 3 pillars of recovery are brought into tandem in somebody's life, that we can make a pretty profound impact on their overall quality of life. And that's how we really view recovery, is if your quality of life is high, then we feel that we're doing our job. We have people come to ADAPT from all over the country and all over the world. So we have over 14 different countries represented in our membership, and we service about 240 members annually at the center here in Carlsbad. As you can imagine, we've got a great visiting program for people that are coming in from out of state or out of country. We have a residence program for those who are local to the San Diego or Southern California region. And then all of our programs are offered virtually as well, which has obviously been in a little bit more high demand with the global pandemic that's been going on over the last few months. So just a little bit about us, and then just to kind of close it out, our mission as an organization is to enable anyone with a disabling condition to live a more fulfilled and capable life. So again, that's a little background on who we are, and thank you so much for having us. Next slide, please. All right, so I'd like to quickly introduce one of my co-founders and a good friend of mine, Troy Baker, who's our Chief Program Officer at ADAPT. He's going to be taking you guys through the educational content today. So Troy's got a deep background in kinesiology and exercise science, both at undergraduate and graduate degree, and he's been working in the field of neurological recovery using exercise, movement, and physical therapy for more than 15 years across a host of different settings. So Troy's going to talk to you guys a little bit today about a principle that we call developmental movement and the neurodevelopmental sequence, which is one of the foundations of our mode of recovery here at ADAPT when it comes to physical recovery and physical health. And so I'm going to pass it over to Troy and allow him to take it from here. So Troy, have at it.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Cure SMA and all of its members and Summit of Strength for this opportunity. I'm happy to be here, excited to be here and share with you information and knowledge, something we're very passionate about. And again, fundamentally and philosophically, what ADAPT is and how we use a specific protocol and system to impact individuals affected by neurological conditions. This system and philosophy was developed over many, many years as an organization, as well as many hours of hands-on experience. And we've utilized this system ultimately to help individuals with chronic neurological conditions, but make an impact. So what we're going to talk about today is developmental movement, and we want to kind of get a little bit of background. Where does this start? How do we understand this? What is developmental movement here at ADAPT? So we have to go back to the very beginning. Where do we start? So starting the day we are born, we are equipped with pre-programmed reflexes and predefined developmental stages for motor learning and development. So this actually starts in your nervous system, the central nervous system in particular, the spine and the brainstem. And this particular system is basically the launch of movement. And this is where we take sensation and therefore from our sensory environment, interpret that information. And once our brain interprets that information, we create movement or responses based off of what we sense and feel. Most human movements begin as reflexes in our environments. Again, at the beginning, the onset as an infant, you know, it's not stimuli driven. Most of that is because as our now primary sensory input, vision is lacking. As we are infants, we see shadows and we start to identify shapes, but not true visual tracking, depth perception, and being able to understand our environment through vision. So rather non-stimuli and sensation. It's automatic. It tends to start initially as involuntary responses to sensation. So the brain-body connection is not really there yet, but understanding that a little bit more as we go through our developmental sequence, it really starts at the head. The head starts to lead the body. Again, because of the lack of vision, it's this brain starting to sense and feel the head and the head control, and therefore that carries over downward into the human body as we go through specific neurological developmental stages in life. Next slide, please. So where do we go next? Well, we know where we start, a reflex-driven, sensory-driven environment. The goal is taking that sensation and being able to interpret it and move it into purposeful or meaningful movement, movement with an intent. So as a baby, we first learn movements through our senses of body movements. Again, the more movement and stimulation we can create in an internal environment, and then as well as an external environment of a baby, the capacity is heightened. So as a baby's reflexes initially start simple, they start small, but ultimately this is the pathway to begin to learn to move. So now that we understand that kind of on the scientific side, we now know that through connecting our movements and experiences, so on the sense and touch side, again, internally in the human body, and then externally, we begin to start creating actions off of that. So again, we'll use movement and the developmental movement spectrum is to describe that. But ultimately, this is the true brain-body connection. Again, where neurological pathways start to develop, sensation is sending information through the body. Therefore, we're starting to now, with intent and meaning and purpose, respond to the senses that we're feeling. And again, starting at the head. Over time, you might start as one cluster or one sensation. These clusters start to combine, and ultimately these clusters help build reflexes and ultimately organize true neurological connections to the brain. So again, as we sense and feel, we roll, we start to turn our head, we might start to use our arms, extremities, our legs, etc. That pathway and that communication ultimately leads to the true neurological connection from the brain to the body. So opening up that developmental stage. In the beginning, again, as we start that brain-body connection, we start to heighten our sense of attention to sensations particularly. There's an emotional balance. More importantly for today, body awareness. So we start to understand, the language might not exist yet, but the brain starts to understand movement and the sensations that we create with movement, and understanding what's it like to move our arms, maybe our legs, or rotate. Again, the true brain-body connection, focus. So again, now sensation in the beginning, might be simple, but as it becomes more organized and complex, our attention to detail, focus, and interpreting that information begins to develop. And then ultimately, lastly, learning and brain capacity. So looking at it as simple to complex, known to unknown movements. The more movement and motions as an infant or toddler we create, again, the more developmental movement and the more brain capacity we can develop in an individual. Next slide, please. So as we understand the nervous system and the nervous system's role and responsibility in this brain-body connection, and this brain-body connection leading to neurological pathways in the human body, now we start to understand ultimately the nervous system is the driving force behind movement. So as a facility and organization, we recognize that and we pay attention to that and we understand that and we utilize that information. So what does this mean for developmental movement? What does this mean for recovery and rehab and adapt? So understanding that, we know that over time, as we mature and develop as individuals, we begin our volitional movement in life through specific fundamental stages that we all naturally progress through in a specified sequence. So again, understanding you got to crawl before we walk. So what does that mean on site when we start talking about the word maybe movement and exercise? Well, in order to go through this particular sequence, you have to develop specific stabilization, specific mobility, and it needs to be learned in specific joints in the body. And once you develop that particular ability or skill, then you progress onto the next developmental stage. So ultimately, the goal is, as an infant, again, these skills are not coached. They might be encouraged or motivated, but we don't break down movement skills in infants and onward. Again, this sequence naturally unfolds through sense stimulation and movement experiences, but the goal is to get towards walking upright. And then eventually, if walking upright, we can speed that movement up into maybe running or more complex athletic movements. But seeing these stages of a natural progression of stages over time and how we develop in order to move through this particular sequence. If this specific sensory sequence and or environment of movements is how the brain and the body initially learns to move, then why should we not train and or systematically progress through these same neurological patterns? So we take this particular sequence that is known and we basically use this as part of a foundation to our recovery model here at ADAPT. So all new members who come to see us go through a particular assessment and evaluation, but part of that is this developmental movement spectrum. And we assess and evaluate all of our members to just better understand where are they at in this particular pattern, sequence of patterns, and where we should be spending more time on as far as maybe some weaknesses or impairments or dysfunction in that particular stage, and how we strengthen that in order to move on to the next stage. And we believe wholeheartedly, kind of a pyramid, as the base of the pyramid, our foundation. This is the foundation of movement as we progress individuals to maybe more complex or dynamic movements or exercise. Next slide, please. So I keep saying the word developmental movement and stages of these particular patterns. So on the right-hand side of the screen, These are the identified stages that we use on site: rolling, sitting, crawling, kneeling, standing, walking, and then running. So again, as a specialist, when I bring someone in, or any of our staff, the first thing we're gonna do is evaluate them and see where they're at. We have a specific scoring system based on each one of these stages, but it helps us get a little bit understanding on where are they at on the developmental spectrum, so we know how to ultimately truly specialize and individualize a program and or a protocol for one of our members coming in. And we've had great success, an impact on multiple neurological conditions. And again, we just go back to the fundamentals of movement and strengthen and reorganize nervous systems, stimulate nervous systems in order to create meaningful and impactful movement within this particular spectrum. So to adapt functional movement therapy, we focus on principles of developmental movement, as just stated. So from infancy and on to walking, as individuals, we systematically progress through organized movements or patterns of skill. So again, on the right-hand side, these are all skills we have to obtain in order to move into the next category or stage of developmental movement. Each movement pattern is preceded and or followed by specific patterns of neurodevelopmental progression. Again, it really starts at the brain and the head, and once you learn control of the head and the brain, and we'll show you some hands-on here in a second, but once you have that ability, that transfers down into the next area of the body, which would be more the trunk and the core. And then from there, you can see it will carry over into more extremities with the trunk and the core and the head, and eventually against gravity, and then we're working towards that upright position. Over time, these movements integrate into a more purposeful and organized skill through space. Again, just thinking about if you do something once, where the efficiency and the quality of that movement, but through repetition, as we go through these stages of development, the more we do it, the more purposeful and meaningful, but ultimately the more functional and efficient these particular patterns become, but also that carries over into the next developmental progression stage. So once all these combined skills are learned, these volitional movements again become more controlled and efficient. So we're gonna pause on the content for a second here, and we're gonna go into a little bit of hands-on. Again, the theme as we shift into the hands-on, I want everyone just to really focus on the right-hand side of the screen. As we provide exercise selection examples, the focus is developmental movement and that particular developmental progression or stage that we're in. So again, rolling, sitting, crawling, kneeling, standing, walking, and then ultimately running or some type of athletic movement. So that will be the focus of today with the hands-on portion. So we're gonna go ahead and go live on video. I'm gonna transfer over. Okay, so again, thank you everybody for your time as we kind of transition over here. This is Alex, one of our consultants and staff here, and this is John. He's going to act as one of our members and or clients. So again, focusing on the right-hand side of the screen, we're just going to start about rolling. And what is rolling to us as an organization? And really, rolling to us is home base. Rolling starts with, it is the start of the true brain-body connection and creating meaning and purposeful, organized neurological patterns in the body. So the first area the brain tends to go to, again, as vision, visual tracking, depth perception, start to kick in a little bit more. The first thing we start to do as infants is roll. So we use rolling as kind of a home base in the exercise selection to see if we can efficiently roll as an individual. Again, the goal is working through these particular stages of development, strengthening these stages so that as we move into, we would maybe use the word exercise, but the next category of developmental progression, it carries over and the training effect is greater. And again, thinking of a pyramid, at the base of our pyramid, we always want to have a solid foundation before we move into the next layer of our pyramid or stage of our pyramid, performance pyramid. And again, having that kind of mindset as we go through the exercise selection, and also more importantly, going through these particular organized developmental patterns of skill. The first thing we might do is ask John and say, you know, our client, John, we want to learn, teach, we're going to make sure we roll efficiently so that when we move into crawling, or excuse me, sitting, again, we're building off of a solid foundation. So the first thing we would ask John, our member, our client, is let's try and disassociate our hips and downward from our upper extremities, so the trunk and upward. I'm going to ask John to lift his arms up above his head. John, I want this arm to kind of come and reach and touch the floor, and I want you to reach across to your left and try and touch the floor and disassociate the trunk, the hips downward, and then come on back. Again, relax, both arms up, extend the left, flex, across, reach and touch, and relax. So again, just kind of thinking more of an upper extremity focus. Maybe we can disassociate and shift that downward. So again, a little bit further away from the brain-body connection and the neurological pathways in the lower half of the body. So John, I want you to lift your leg up straight. Straighten that leg out. I want you to, again, try and disassociate your hips from the trunk upward. Can you rotate across and just keep the lower half of your body coming across? Touch the floor. Come on up. Bring it down and relax. So again, a progression, thinking about the further away from the brain. The communication, obviously we're communicating with different areas of the body and requires a little bit more coordination based off of this musculature. Let's say that John is just more able-bodied. He has more control. He has more strength. Let's ask John, we're gonna have him go completely roll into his stomach, okay? So John, we're gonna come up across. I want you to flex your hip. Come on up. Rotate across. Come on your stomach. Swim that right arm across and relax. Again, a little bit more dynamic and complex. I want you to just think from a neurological perspective, just how much more coordination is going on in the human body, requiring more brain-body connection. Why? Because ultimately, we're using more muscle groups. Again, so from a neurological perspective, coordination and communication. Okay, come back across, extend your left hip, good, come across, right, reach, and rolling back. Good, and relax. So again, just some exercise examples within that one neurological developmental sequence or developmental movement stage, okay, rolling. The next thing we would go is into sitting. So we would do a modification first for today. So John, we're gonna have you sit up. Okay, so safety setups again, depending on the individual, as far as we're always safety first. So we use a lot of pieces of equipment untraditionally. We use yoga blocks and gait belts, foam rolls, yoga mats, again, to always make sure our members and our clients are anatomically correct, okay, as often as possible, so that we're always reinforcing quality movement patterns, especially as if we're going through the stages of development. So the first thing first, again, the next stage off of rolling is sitting. Okay, so we have a modification here. So maybe John needs just a little bit more assistance in the sitting posture. Again, now flexibility starts to play a role in this. Trunk and intersegmental trunk stability. Okay, so now John has to have head control and stability in the head, the trunk, all the way down to the hips. And again, there's a certain level of mobility that's required and flexibility just to get into this position. But let's just say John is just a more high functioning individual, has more control of his body again. So then we can progress this particular movement, still focusing on that neurodevelopment pattern or developmental movement pattern of sitting. Now can John, again, think of the word stability. Does he have the stability, the strength, and the control to keep his head in an anatomically correct position? Does his trunk have the stability and control to sit upright and maintain normal curves of the spine? This, again, as the next stage of sequence, you get to have a little bit, as individuals, we begin to start to control our upper extremities. So from an exercise standpoint, we can do all sorts of different exercises, but focusing on this particular pattern, can we keep neutral alignment of the spine? Can we control and stabilize this position, head control? And again, thinking about upper extremity as a progression within this particular stage of neurodevelopment. The next one we're going to move into is crawling. So we're going to go ahead and, John, let's go ahead and go into tummy. Alex, if you don't mind doing the safety setup, please. So again, we're moving up the spectrum, our developmental progression scale. So we're gonna move into crawling. Again, safety setups is always our top priority, depending on the individual that we're working with and how their body mechanically and functionally presents, and how we can always provide a safe environment for our members while we're going through specific movements in our exercises. So again, as we move into this next stage, it starts to move into locomotion a little bit, load bearing a little bit as far as the hips and the shoulder complex. Again, depending on the individual's abilities. John, let's kind of go up into elbows and knees. Alex, you're going to spot his hips, keep control, come all the way up, flex them. Again, so maybe a regression, just a simple starting stage for someone in this particular pattern is, can they get the hip stability, the trunk control, okay, shoulder stability while they're in this position. And again, if you think about it, I know John's facing the ground, and I know it's bilateral, but he is in a flex position. So when I said the word locomotion, just starting to see as this is part of the stage of walking. Again, we're following this known fundamental sequence that comes from our nervous system at the beginning of life. So let's say John's got upper extremity function and ability. So maybe we progress this into, go ahead and extend, put your hands down in this position. So again, thinking about crawling. We're not crawling yet, but at least kind of the preceding stages of crawling. So again, a little bit more upper extremity dominant, but ultimately for us, head control, trunk control, hip control. Can he stabilize this position? Let's say, John, again, we're going to progress and maybe stay within the crawling spectrum, but John's got more function. So let's go ahead and take away that safety setup. John, I'm going to have you come a little bit more forward away from the box. Right there. And Alex, you might come on that for a second. Let's just say we want to progress this. He has the control. What control? Trunk control, core activation, hip control, hip stability. Again, maybe traditional exercises we can implement here, but the focus is the stage of the neurodevelopmental sequence that we're in, or that developmental movement pattern. So John's in the crawling. Let's go ahead and lift your right arm forward, hold this position. Again, traditional exercises with the emphasis of that neurological pattern we're trying to reinforce. Go ahead and relax, bring that down. Let's just say that was our upper extremity, movement. Let's go into lower extremity, extend, drive your right leg back, hold, squeeze that tush. Again, can he stabilize this position? Bring it in, and let's go opposite arm, opposite leg. So he'll go left arm, there you go, right arm, left leg. Again, you can turn this into reps, you can turn it into holds, but really what this is starting to engage these particular muscle slings in the body. And these slings are used when we're in locomotion, this kind of cross sprawl position where we're starting to learn patterns across the body, upper and lower extremities. But more importantly, again, the brain-body connection is always our focus. And our focus, we use exercise, but our focus is neurological first. Are we reinforcing known neurological patterns, quality neurological patterns in the body, and movements? So a progression, the next stage would be kneeling. So we'll go ahead and go to maybe our regressed or modified kneeling position. So we'll go safety setup. We'll go extend your hips, drive through your hips and hold. Again, kneeling. So we're in this bilateral position. So ultimate goal for the sequence, if you look at the bottom, is walking, and then obviously the increased speed and contractions, running, and athletic movements can play into this. But I at least want you to see like some of the preceding abilities and skills we need to develop before we move into that. So again, on the exercise front, we're in the kneeling spectrum, okay, of the neurodevelopmental sequence or developmental movement pattern. Okay, John's now able to use his hips. So think of standing. He's learning to load into his body, trying to get anatomically correct checkpoints in alignment with itself against gravity. So again, head control, trunk control, hip control. Can he hold this position? If we want to turn into, let's just say, traditional strength exercise, we can do hero squats. John can come up and down, hands on the box, lean forward, hinge, drive through the hips. Come on down. Lean forward a little bit more, lean forward, drive through the hips, come on up. So again, traditional exercises, but just how we use movement and exercises to reinforce this particular developmental stage that we're in this moment in time. Let's say John's just got more control, more function. We can turn it into some balance exercises. Let's kind of raise your right arm up towards the ceiling. Again, start simple, known, let his nervous system and his body coordinate and communicate with itself, let it sense and feel, just like as infants and onward. We have to sense and feel. We don't want to rush through our exercise selection. We always want to communicate and make sure our members and clients, from a neurological perspective, are interpreting the information both internally and externally, what we're trying to accomplish in that moment in time. Again, let's just say John is high functioning. He can bring both arms up, okay? Again, challenging him in different ways. We're still in that kneeling pattern. Alex, you can do perturbations and challenge him a little bit more, and he can give some misdirectional forces and basically make John react. But that reaction is stimulating his nervous system, forcing him to really increase reaction within the body. Again, brain-body connection. Come on down. Let's say, again, John is a different client, different member, high functioning. Okay, we would know this after the evaluation where we go next within these particular stages. So not everybody participates in all these particular movements. John can go into a half kneeling. So we're still in that kneeling pattern as far as following the criteria or the fundamental developmental skill. But again, if you can think about the word exercises or the whole list of different movements you can do and or exercises in this kneeling stage. John, you put your arms out, we can work on rotation. Again, you can come on up, bring your arms up to the sky. Again, different things we can do. Of course, if you've been in a gym or clinic, there's a whole array of spectrum of equipment you can use to accomplish certain things. I just look at specific movements. Can he nail home base first? Can he accomplish this first? Again, depending on ability, let's just say this is easy for John. We've progressed over time. We've developed this particular skill. We can progress this even one more stage within the kneeling spectrum. Let's bring that knee off the ground. A bit of tall kneeling, okay? So again, think of the movements that you would do in traditional kneeling, you know, split leg, and now a tall kneeling. You can repeat those in this particular progression. Again, challenging them a little bit differently, but the goal is staying within that kneeling stage. And come on down and relax. The last one, we'll kind of turn you around, come on up. We're going into standing. So again, thinking about developmental progression, we got to start, and we start actually all our members enrolling. They go through the whole thing. Some of our members might spend more time in one of those particular developmental patterns and what we're trying to accomplish, again, depending on goals and what their body's telling us over time. But more importantly, we wholeheartedly follow the system from beginning to end, goal-driven, and making sure that what we're doing is safe and impactful for our members. So actually achieving and working towards specific outcomes. So again, maybe kind of on the regression side of standing, so we got a safety setup. We're locking out his ankles. We got a yoga block, gait belt. We're going to block his knees out with a foam roll and maybe a walker. We could do this at a standing squat rack. Anywhere in this facility, we can do standing. And again, just thinking about what are we trying to accomplish? Not so much what equipment are we using, but what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to accomplish standing. Again, as you go through that neurodevelopmental sequence or developmental movement pattern, okay, walking is the most complex. You're using all the joints, you're using all the body, the whole body, all the muscle synergies to accomplish a particular skill or task. This one we just call standing. So Alex is going to reach around his hips. John's going to lean forward, 1, 2, 3, up. So again, depending on the level of ability, but a modification or how we would start someone maybe who hasn't stood in a while, but you know, we're almost there, but we're not quite there to do it independently. We have spotters. Sometimes, you know, depending on, again, the member, we might have individuals behind them spotting in particular areas of the body. Just once again, what are we trying to accomplish? Efficiency, quality movement of standing. Ear, shoulder, hip, knee, and ankle alignment. Trying to maintain normal curves of the spine, and then also being just mindful of weight distribution. Sensation is a big one. So what are they sensing and feeling? Again, on the exercise selection, there's all sorts of things we can do from here, from a standing posture. We can do rotations, we can do perturbations. Again, just trying to get them to sense and feel what it's to stand again and tapping into that. This is a ground up approach for us. We're really big into the foot sensation, and we're working our way up. So from the bottom up, and then also from the top down. Is your brain communicating? Is it connecting with certain muscle groups that we need to actually stand? And if not, what modifications or safety setups do we need in this moment in time to allow that and safely do that with our particular members? If we want to turn into strength, again, maybe we do some sit to stands, just on the fitness principle side, but we can do some sit to stands. Don's going to come back up. 1, 2, 3. Hip extension, really get him to connect again with his lower extremities and his bodies. Again, the specialist or the consultant is always an extension of his nervous system. So there's a balance in how much we assist and how much we resist. The goal is volitional, meaningful, independent movement. How do we get there, and how do we get there safely? Again, so if we're in the standing position, maybe John's got a little bit more ability. So we can go hands off, challenge him differently in different modalities. Again, we can do balance, arms up, holding these positions. So think of just standing, but how do we progress just from a static stance, maybe something a little bit more dynamic, upper extremity involvement, rotation, etc. Arms down, relax. And then the last pattern, clear the area. At the bottom is walking. So just we'll put a hold on running, but just think of running and an increase in speed of contraction and velocity from walking. Things do change mechanically, but we'll stop with walking today. So again, walking different for everybody. At least on site, we have an array of equipment that always we want to make sure we're enforcing good quality movement and safety of our clients. So functional efficiency, proficiency, structural efficiency and proficiency in the body. And so that as we're trying to redevelop neurological pathways and communication, again, that's always our top priority so that we learn to move well and move often. So again, from a walking standpoint, starting at least similar to standing, the gait cycle, teaching the gait pattern is a very complex task. It's very dynamic. There's a lot of cues and a lot of coaching, whether we're talking about from the ground up, heel strike, mid stance and toe off, weight distribution in the feet, using your feet correctly as far as the hinges in the foot and sensing and feeling all that vibration. Obviously at the knee and the hip, specific mechanics that we coach and on site. But more importantly, letting the member feel safe and being able to do this and using devices that allow that to promote that. As we know, as soon as we go, if we haven't been load bearing or standing or walking in a long time, we'll go ahead and relax, John. If we haven't been walking in a long time, it can be a little scary. It can be a little, members are very hesitant in the beginning. Our goal, especially with walking, because it is very complex and dynamic, and as well as the injury risk are there, but how do we minimize that? And how do we promote quality neurological development within that walking pattern of the developmental scale? And how do we reinforce good and quality organized movement within that particular scale? So again, just as a review and as a recap, as an organization, we wholeheartedly believe in developmental movement and knowing that the human body, the nervous system, is responsible for that. And that communication and sensation drive our movement. And we've found that it's very impactful across the spectrum of chronic neurological conditions. We found modifications, how to promote safe, quality movement patterns. And ultimately what we're trying to do is tap back into that reflex. Can we turn that reflex back on? Can we stimulate it? Can we activate it? And can we get the human body again in that recovery hour to basically go back in time, but something that's not foreign, something that it's there. We all have it to a certain degree, and how do we turn that back on and or refine that particular skill or task? We'll go ahead and go into Q&A. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Troy. and John and the entire ADAPT team. Hi everyone, this is Sarah with the Cure SMA Family Support Department. Next, like you said, we're going to go over a few questions that have come in from our community. Question 1. With the pandemic and not being able to go to PT or OT, what can we do at home?
Yeah, I mean, as an organization, first, we provide online services and virtual programs where, a facility like this has staff who everyone have, the education and the experience and have worked, hands-on full-time for quite some time now with individuals with these particular conditions and have an understanding of just kind of the day-to-day, but more importantly, I think for us, goal-driven, understanding what our clients' goals are and working together towards those goals. Not everybody has the same goals. We found that a lot of the members that we see have come through in the past, have gone through a particular protocol that wasn't impactful and or specialized for them. It was kind of traditional. So a facility like this, they do exist, and that, we're here to help and service our members, whether it's virtually and or on site.
Yeah, and maybe I could just add to that a little bit too, Troy. This is John. I would say, aside from, having a team of professionals walk through, a home program, I think another thing that is good is just deliberate awareness of movement, whether it be while you're sitting watching TV or waking up in the morning, just trying to use whatever movement that you have in a very deliberate fashion at various points through the day, even if it's just for a couple seconds. I think all of that is certainly going to be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, a thing that's thrown out there a lot, that we like to use is, mindful movement versus mindless exercise, and using what you have, and at least starting with that brain-body connection and really tapping into sensing and feeling movement versus just ignoring that skill and just trying to get through it or go through the motion or movement. And again, what we found when individuals, based off of, again, abilities and disabilities, if they're focused and their thoughts and intentions are there, there's a greater training effect in that, without having to think about, what's the best exercise for this or what piece of equipment I need for that, but just starting simple and being mindful of your movement and connected to your body with what you have.
Perfect, thank you. Question 2. If muscles continue to tighten, is stretching still important?
Yeah, so tone in the body, and we experience tone a lot in the body here. Let me just talk about our approach, and it's case by case, but what we found with tightness and tone in the body, we found that there are a couple modalities that we use that we have high success with. Stretching is part of that. But again, it depends on access. But one of the first things we use with tone and tightness is we like to exhaust the tone. So knee jerk, someone would say, okay, let's just focus on breathing. Let's focus on relaxation. Let's focus on trying to take control of your nervous system and take back control and relax. And again, that's part of it. But I think the next step, what we do here is something rhythmic, as we found successful. And what I mean by rhythmic is something like a bike or an arm ergometer. Again, this comes down to access, but if you have access to something that allows you to do a repetitive motion over a period of time, low intensity, we're not working on strength and endurance, we're trying to exhaust the tone in the body and the contracture. Usually when the body has tone or contractures like that, or stiffness and rigidity, as soon as you pull on it or you try and stretch it, the first thing it's going to do is turn on more. And it's usually the reflex to that stimulation that you're creating in that injured nervous system. So why I use the word rhythmic is because that repetition over time, i.e. exhaustion, but there's a little bit of a calming effect where I've felt, and with our members, as they become more, I can talk to them and we can get them focused on their body. We can focus on the breathing while we're doing something rhythmic and getting the tone to start to let go. And again, in the first session, that might take 10 minutes, but over time, that 10 minutes might lead to 1 minute. Again, this is kind of case by case and how you go about that. The second thing we have success with is electrical stimulation. There's different modalities of electrical stimulation that exist. We've found you can go on either side. Let's just say your biceps stuck in flexion. We can exhaust the tone with stim, on the bicep itself, or we've also had success on going the opposing side of the tone, so the antagonist, so the tricep, if we're talking about a bicep stuck in flexion. If we start to stim the tricep, again, maybe trying to promote muscle re-education or maybe strength or other modalities that exist on specific platforms. But we found too over time, again, through repetition, it doesn't happen on the first one, but through repetition, we've had success on taking out the tone. Some other success stories we've had as far as maybe the tone, it's not in my arms, it's in my legs, okay, or the stiffness or the rigidity, standing. Again, thinking about exhausting and fatiguing those. And the goal is allowing the nervous system to let go of those particular muscle groups that are turned on. And then hopefully over time, again, thoughts and intentions, mindful movement, and trying to reconnect with your body. Over time, we found that standing is a successful way to take out some of the tone in the lower extremities.
Thank you. Question number 3. What are the best ways to maintain strength and a range of motion in the arms?
Again, after a proper assessment and evaluation and identifying, maybe the weaknesses and the impairments that contribute to this, kind of like what we said in the beginning, it's an adaptation. If you want to get stronger, you have to strength train. If you want to improve range of motion, you have to stretch. Again, working with these populations, it can be challenged at home or independently. So at least knowing, the training effect, you have to participate in the training that produces a specific training effect in the body. So maintaining strength, again, joint by joint, muscle by muscle, what we're trying to accomplish. But if we want to get stronger, we need to strength train. If you want to increase range of motion, you need to spend time stretching.
All right. Question 4. Do you feel that all physical therapists are adequately trained on how to work with patients with SMA? What should a person look for in a PT?
Yeah, I'm going to be clear and professional. A lot of stories we come through here is, and I'm going to speak on behalf of ADAPT Functional Movement Center. Every time a new member or a new client comes to our facility, more often than not, they give us unfortunate story about their traditional therapy experience prior to us. And a facility like this is different. And we also view the body a little bit differently in how we treat members. And as well as we expressed in the beginning, we have an integrative approach to recovery. So as far as the physical therapy front, again, I think you should take some type of responsibility, maybe calling in before you go in and vetting the staff and maybe identifying if there's a staff on site that has had experience with SMA or neurological populations versus going in dark and cold and you're just going to get what you get and you don't know, the type of experiences that they had. And that doesn't mean that all traditional therapy or therapists fall under that. But again, to me, what I've learned speaking with my members personally is vetting and calling in advance and understanding, what type of services those particular settings provide, and more importantly, the type of experiences they've had and hours they spent with those particular individuals with specific chronic neurological conditions, diagnoses, or indications.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to question 5. How long, how much movement, and in what measure can physical exercise support SMA patients?
Yeah, so again, our goal here is quality of life, and we all define that, I think, a little bit differently. Most often, why? Because our goals are different. We come from maybe different struggles or levels of paralysis. So again, kind of like the strength and flexibility conversation, you have to participate in something. If you don't move and you don't participate in some type of recovery aspect, the diagnosis or the indications gonna, the magnitude is going to increase as far as functional decline. So you have to move, you have to continue to move, and you have to move well. As far as on site, again, depending on age, how long they've had the condition or the diagnosis, the severity of paralysis. It means a little bit something different to everybody, but the one thing we promote here is, physical health and wellness. You need to move and continue to move. Purposeful and meaningful movement and quality movement. Mental and emotional health and wellness as part of that too. The body physically is only going to go so far if the mind and the emotional state of a person is not centered and in the right place. Because that, as we learned in the beginning, the brain controls movement in the body. So if our brain and our emotions are overwhelming our nervous system and our body, again, that might have a negative effect on movements. So again, understanding kind of where mental and emotional health and wellness is part of recovery and a part of health and wellness journey itself. And then lastly, again, we have the community part, but identity, some type of identity and self-development. But it needs to be meaningful for the individual. They want and need to go through this. Otherwise, again, techniques, modalities, pieces of equipment, they're only going to go so far. And again, it has to be meaningful, and the individual has to want to move and work towards those particular goals.
Thank you. Question number 6. I have adult SMA and walk with a cane. I have noticed that I am losing my balance more often. Is there anything I can do to help with my balance?
Absolutely. Balance is actually one of the most complex, other than walking, because balance is a large part of that. Balance is very challenging, and I think it starts, you need to identify the approach to how you want to train balance. So first of all, you need to understand that the nervous system, i.e. communication, and some of the topic at hand today, that driving force between coordination and communication with the body is ultimately responsible for balance. Vision, vestibular, and somatosensory are kind of the 3 areas that we typically focus on. So vision, sometimes, some of our members don't realize they don't have vision or quality vision to track and sense their environment from the visual standpoint. And or some of our members overuse vision for balance. So they have no kinesthetic awareness. That could be stability, mobility, strength, and in the human body, because they're so reliant on vision for balance. So again, understanding a little bit, it's a whole body approach to balance. So outside of maybe the traditional neural, one thing I wholeheartedly believe on is strength, and more importantly, power. So type 2 fiber types in the body. And why I say that is because when you're trying to recover or restabilize the body or get your center of mass back within your base of support, we can just say become balanced again. There's a reaction time that's required for that, and there's a speed component that's required for that in order to recover. So there's specific fibers in the body that ultimately are in charge of that. And as we age and or become sedentary, these are some of the first muscles that atrophy. And 2, if we don't train, some strength and some speed or power or speed aspects in our programming, again, we're missing some of the boat on what truly is balanced training. So again, balance, to really answer that, it requires a very specific assessment. So you can identify, is it truly neural? Is it vision, vestibular, somatosensory? Is it maybe just the lack of strength? Is it maybe just the lack of mobility in specific joints in the body that, again, as we distort mechanical alignment in the body, we start to shift our center of mass off. That only increases our fall risk. So kind of to summarize that, sometimes it comes down to just posture. Posture not only standing, but posture when you're moving, dynamic, and transitioning, from one leg to another or from left to right in your environment. So again, balance is, again, a very complex task and skill, and how we go about it truly starts, at least on site here, is with that specialized assessment and evaluation to identify where we go next.
Thank you so much. What are exercises for an ambulatory type 3 who can no longer get up after a fall? When walking, I often walk on the outside of my foot and it turns outward, and when tired, it rolls. Why does this happen and how do I fix it?
Yeah, if we're gonna just focus on the ankle complex part of the question, there was multiple questions in that. We'll just start at the ankle complex question first. Again, neurologically, we have to understand, is it neurological communication or a lack of communication? Is it neurological fatigue? Okay, or is it maybe more on the functional side? We lack, structural and functional efficiency, which we can say mobility, stability, and strength. So the ankle complex is very dynamic. Why would it invert versus evert? Why is it supinate or pronate? Again, to start maybe from a functional standpoint and understanding, just kind of muscles in the body, as far as some create tone and the other needs to relax. When a muscle begins to fatigue, again, if we're rolling on the outside or the lateral aspect of the foot, there are specific muscles in the ankle complex that might be overactive, and there's specific muscles in that ankle complex that might be underactive. So if something's overactive, and identifying which one, per this conversation, the outside, maybe it's posterior tibialis, manual work, stretching, self-myofascial release, trying to get this muscle that's locked short to relax and lengthen to restore normal alignment or normal length tension in that particular joint. And then also isolating and strengthening the opposing muscle group. So maybe peroneals. Again, once we do assess and evaluate, we can identify which ones, but maybe turning on the peroneals, maybe a little bit more anterior tib, and isolating it and strengthening that. Again, thinking about as the muscles, one side relax, one side you strengthen, you can now see the ankle complex kind of going into a more functional alignment and anatomically correct position. And again, why would it do that? Again, it could be multiple things: neurological fatigue, just overall fatigue, maybe piggybacking off a little bit of the balance conversation. What's your posture look like when you're walking? Where is your center of mass? Are you favoring one leg, i.e. weight distribution, more than the other? And then injuries, where have injuries might play in this, where we've changed neurological patterns and created new ones based off of compensation and dysfunction, but those new ones unfortunately are not serving us well over time.
Thank you so much for that. And I think we have time for one more question. Can you share any ideas for helping with contractures on the arms? One arm is locked at 90 degrees from driving and the other can't bend much at all.
Yeah, just a review and a recap on, I believe that question, we had a similar question in the beginning of the question Q&A. Again, we look at as tone and tonicity in that particular area of the body. And on site, as far as it adapts, we look at it as it's a disorganized nervous system. So we go back in, and like I said, initially we would try and exhaust tone or tension that's on and won't turn off. We talked about rhythmic exercises and rhythmic movements, and or electrical stimulation is kind of our first priority. But going through the lens of ultimately, if we can exhaust this tone over time, again, it doesn't usually happen in the first go. But over time and through repetition, just like all movement, you have to do repetition to reinforce this neurological pattern, whether it's efficient or inefficient, but you have to keep doing repetitions to engrave this into the nervous system in the body, so it becomes automatic. But as again, back to the tone, going through these particular modalities and then making adjustments. Stretching, again, we discussed, is part of that, but not one of the first two we would go to.
Great. Thank you so much again, John and Troy, for sharing this great presentation with all of us today. We appreciate everyone who joined in on today's webinar, and thank you for sharing part of your day with us. You will be receiving a follow-up email with a survey link, and we appreciate any feedback that you have. We are grateful for the incredible support from our sponsors for making the Summit of Strength virtual webinar series possible, and we would like to say a special thank you to Ionis for their assistance and support with today's webinar topic. If there's ever anything QRSMA can do for you and your family, or any questions we can help with, please reach out to us anytime at familysupport@qrsma.org. Thank you all again. Thank you to our sponsors, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you guys so much.